Um, a- Advocacy never rests. Thank you, Chris. Advocacy never rests, and I think we've got a lot to go over and debrief on from this last legislative session. There was a lot that went on, and some really good things, and one not so great thing, and so we're gonna dive into that. I know people are still kind of joining us, but I don't know if there's anybody here that doesn't know me already, but I am Jen Wisdahl. I work on the policy team at FASD United, and have been the fortunate one that's been able to support all of you in this advocacy and legislative work over the last 2 years. And I want to start with a big thank you for the grace and support that you all have extended to me as I've been doing that and really learning my way and finding my way. So I want to thank you for being here as well. We'll start out with a little bit of an update from Tom, just kind of in general, what's going on with FASD United. So Tom, I don't know if you have anything to share with the group, but I figured I'd give you some space to do that.
Well, thank you, Jan. Yes, good to see you and good to see everyone. And speaking of good to see you, yes, it is the holiday season. Some people think, well, are you going to have the forum this month? Yes, indeed. I mean, this is now two years, 24 consecutive months. You know where you can find us the last Wednesday of every month doing the policy forum, as we've done, I think, 11 years uninterrupted with the weekly roundup. So we will do it no matter the time of the year, the season, or what may be happening. You can find us here. And, just a second ago, as you put the slide up with my name on there to say something, the first thing that came into my mind, Jen, was I don't know if it's your most recent note out to advocates, but you used the word emotion and talked about emotion. And I think that's apt as we get here to the end of the 117th Congress and look at what had happened. And yes, unfortunately, some of the first emotions are frustration and dismay. But also, I want to, also with Jan, express the gratitude to everyone. We're in the arena now. Many years ago, there have been some successes legislatively on the federal level, but not for a long time. And we're really part of the conversation at the committee level with key members. It's all because of you. And I can't tell you over 2 years, this giant maze, how many different changes of direction, we learn intelligence and the policy team finding out, how to make progress and pursuing that, and so many different avenues and channels. And you don't know when there's a gremlin around the corner, and particularly at the worst time possible. So all in all, still a great success. I think so because of other emotions like the resolve and the determination that we all have, that has grown from being a part of the process. And we always knew it's going to be incremental. So we are very excited next year, not just on the policy front, but keep in mind, the Navigator continues to grow. And after all, the Navigator and what it's doing, all the research that is ongoing is there to improve outcomes for individuals who are affected and make sure people who have been prenatally exposed can be diagnosed and on and on. And that's what the Navigator does. And that's what so many programs that, whether it's Proof Alliance and Florida Center and Facets and all the affiliates, which you're all doing, all the researchers are so vital and have been for 50 years part of this process. So I feel strong and eagerly anticipate the new year and the new opportunities. We have more ambition than ever. Of course, a lot of work to be done. I'm not going to dwell, and none of us have dwelled on the problems and the challenges, but we have been discovering solutions and making strides in so many areas. Let's just continue to grow that exponentially. So you're going to see that from us with all of our projects growing. this new process, a new project with the military health system. I think that's going to be really interesting as within that within that system, we can see what can happen from a clinical standpoint and how that might be applicable to broader civilian systems of care. So that and a lot of other new things that are ongoing. Lastly, we a year and a half ago evolved from NoFAS, all the good of NoFAS, into the new energy of FASD United. That continues with our new strategic plan, and just again incrementally defining that, defining FASD United and our new program. So thank you, everyone. Best wishes for the holiday and 2023. Thanks, Jan.
Thanks, Tom. All right, Susan Ellsworth, did you want to give an update on anything the affiliates are doing right now on the affiliate network? And you're muted.
Thank you, Jen. I am Susan Ellsworth, and I am the FASD United Affiliate Director. And again, just to echo the thanks from the FASD United team for your involvement, commitment, and investment of your best selves to the network and the endeavors that we've had over this past year. We greatly appreciated. We've had the most growth in the 2022 year of adding advocates and adding affiliates to the affiliate network. And I did want to just take a second here to let you know that we are looking at our affiliate network, and we've been very intentional about bringing on affiliates that come from different backgrounds that wouldn't necessarily be what people would have expected. We've added task force this year in agencies and organizations that are under governments and educational umbrellas, and we continue to add those. So just keep your eyes out and your ears out for groups that you come in contact with that are doing work and moving things along, and connect them to us and give us a chance to talk to them about how we could partner with them on the work that they're already doing and to expand their reach and expand ours too. And to wish you safe and happy new year. Thanks, Jen.
Susan. Okay, so let's dive into this. I know all of you know that unfortunately the FASD Respect Act did not pass. And we want to go through the hows and the whys and the whos and the whats, and kind of give ourselves a chance to breathe on that for a minute. And part of the reason why I let everybody know right when it happened, and we had, I know you all probably received an invite to a Zoom session we had last week, last Thursday evening, to be precise, because we wanted to give people a space to really process their emotions around how they were feeling about how this went and how they were feeling about the bill. And part of that is because we do need to give ourselves space to process emotions. That's really important. And part of it also was because we wanted to be able to come into this session with at least some of our emotions processed, so that we could use this session to dissect analytically what happened and use that information to move forward and go forward into 2018. And I'm not saying that we need to put a cap on our feelings or our emotions or cut them short or not feel them. Goodness knows I'm still going through that process myself. But I wanted to make sure that we were giving space to both. So I'm not asking anybody in this call to censor their emotions or not have them. However, I do also want to be able to not have these last 2 years be in vain, and take that energy and move forward. And I think we can, and I think we're in a good space to do that. So let's dive in and see what happened. I feel like that should be in big red letters. So, and Susan's going to join me on this, but when last we met, we were talking about how the FASD Respect Act was in good shape to be included in the Omni. We were there. We had agreed upon language. Things were going on that track. Word from our sponsors was, and don't quote me on this, but I know Susan has the exact quote. Word was that we were in really good shape. But as a backup, we have a hotline. And with the Omni, there's a lot of political give and take, right? Because each side needs to have a win in partisan politics. And so there was a lot of negotiation over what went into the Omni. And so they had this backup plan all along of hotlining the bill if for whatever reason it didn't make it into the Omni. So, around December 8th through 12th-ish, all of this was happening and swirling around, and we were hearing, oh, maybe Omni, maybe no, maybe Omni, maybe no. And then we were hearing hotline because the Omni was finished and we weren't in the language for the Omni. So I don't know if some of you saw my Facebook post where I was like waiting for the Omni language to come out because we wanted to see what was included, right? And if we were in there. So we weren't. Plan B, hotline. And there was a lot of back and forth going at that point with our lead authors who were negotiating that path for a hotline bill. And I'll explain what a hotline bill is in just a second. But there were emails going back and forth talking about how they were connecting with the different senators on committee. And if this senator had an objection, they were trying to go around it and trying to get cost offsets. And like there was a lot of work being done in the background by the congressional staff, by our lead authors staff, who are really working to get this pushed through. They wanted this to go. They wanted this to be our year. I would say North Carolina, it was Senator Burr and Senator Murray really came together on this. And that is a direct result of the outreach that was done, getting them on board. And they agreed on language, right? Which is big to get them to even agree on the language they're going to use to put things forward. Because when a bill is introduced, they don't just say, oh, I like this bill exactly the way it is. Yes, we're going to put our stamp on it. Yes and no, click. They look at it, they change the language around depending on what they can agree on. It's all a big negotiation, right? So we didn't make it on the Omni. We went to a hotline. And a hotline is kind of a way of getting a bill passed that's not contentious. It's a really quick way of getting a bill passed. So they literally have phones in the legislators' offices. And if they get unanimous consent by the Senate, boom, the bill goes through. And meaning that if nobody objects to it. Well, the one senator from the great state of Utah, unfortunately, and he had been pushing back a little bit all along, wanted to know how it was going to be paid for, and we had gotten more information to him, and the staff was working on it. And at the end of the day, when the bill was hotlined, we thought he was going to be okay with it, and he wasn't. And so the bill died. And at that moment, at that same day, that's when the Senate session ended, the House session ended the next day, and with that, the 117th Congress was closed. So that, in a nutshell, brief Cliff Notes version, is what happened. And Susan, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, I think, Jen, you've done a good job. And I think that's why I think all of us felt so bad, because it wasn't until that final email that we got from Senator Klobuchar's staff that, and that was just when the Senate adjourned. So we were in play until the very last. And you get disappointed because you have, and it's staff that are doing a lot of this. So, but they get directives from their senators. But it had been going on, this back and forth with Senator from Utah's staff for over a week with various emails, and it was a roller coaster of emotions because we'd hear one day, we think we've got this agreement. And then there's got to be something, they need more information. And we actually had on Wednesday before the Thursday, there was a telephone conference call with the Help Committee staff, Republican and Democrat, with Klobuchar and Murkowski, and I believe the senators, trying to come up with some kind of an agreement that would pass muster. And then after that, we'd gotten positive responses on it. So I thought it was a done deal. And it wasn't. And I think, when I think about the emotions that we all felt, if we didn't care about this, it's like love. When you really care about somebody and then you lose them, you're really upset. And, if we would have said this 2 years ago, that you would be so upset about some bill in Congress that you would have these emotions, I would have said no. And so that I think is really indicative of what has transpired here, folks, in this last 2 years. You have really, you don't even have to know what's in the Respect Act. You say Respect Act, FASD Respect Act, and people know what it is. And so the next Congress, we aren't starting over. We are just taking it to final conclusion. And I just want to read a little bit from Senator Klobuchar's Health LA. She says, I think we made a lot of progress over the last several months and are well positioned to get stuff done next Congress. I'll also follow up with Murkowski and McCollum's staff on how we can get the priority language across the finish line next year. I still think we are very close and this is doable. I'm sorry to disappoint you all after all the hard work you and your team and the advocates have put in this year. I don't think it has been in vain. We'll get this done. So that was the last message that we got. So I just want to thank all of you and all of everybody that that's been involved with this. It's going to happen. So but if anybody has any questions on what Jen and I just said, I think we've got time. I think, Jen, we can.
Well, we've got a couple in the chat. And so
Okay.
the questions that Lee was asking were predominantly around how the bill would be paid for. And for those of you that sat in on a number of calls in Texas, I'm looking at you, Texas, that was always a question that was had by the Republicans, is how is this going to be paid for? They were concerned about being fiscally conservative. And so they did come up with a CBO score, which is what's it going to cost, basically. A CBO score says what's going to cost.
Congressional Office.
Yeah, and because the bill was going through with such sums language, meaning that we would have to go through the appropriations process to get money into the bill, because that's the language that they agreed on in the Help Committee, and that wasn't our choice. That's something that they agreed on in the Senate. There really wasn't any cost associated with it. The last question that Senator Lee asked, because he didn't say no to the bill, he just kept asking questions that ran out the time. And the last question he asked was he wanted written justification from the agencies that would be getting funding from this bill if we got appropriations through, on why they needed that money. And so it was kind of a stall question. And so, but all the questions that they asked, that was part of the scramble, was getting those questions answered, right? Because we didn't want there to be any blockage to this hotline. And so Murkowski and Klobuchar's staff were working really hard to get those answers as quickly as possible, in addition to working on all the other priorities that they had. But really, they were extending a lot of political capital on our behalf. because the time that their staffers spend and the outreach that they do to other members, that is political capital. You only do that when you care about something. It's
Okay.
not a linear process where, oh, yep, I agree with that, click. I don't agree with that, click. It's, again, all this big negotiation piece, and they will only extend staff energy and time if that negotiation they feel is worth it. So
Okay, the question on the different bills. Okay, so we haven't talked much about this. The committee helped staff with Murkowski and Klobuchar's staff drew up language, what we call the priority language. And that was okay by leadership in the Senate. They also worked closely at this last week in getting approval from Morris Rogers' staff, who's the ranking member of Energy and Commerce Committee, and Pallone staff. And we were also in communication with our lead sponsor and her staff, McCullum, on that, because you have to, with the hotline, you have to have unanimous consent from both sides. So it would pass in the Senate and they would send it over to the House, and it would be already preordained that they were going to vote on that at the last day of after it didn't get into the Omni. So they had already agreed. So it was, but we had that one senator who wouldn't let it pass, wouldn't accept that language. So you have to have unanimous consent, and just having a vote on the bill in both House and Senate and having unanimous consent, wouldn't that have been fabulous? I mean, I would have flown out to Washington, D.C. and gone to the White House on that one, but we'll get there, folks. So let's see, any other questions?
Yeah, could I ask how stigma related to all this, do you think?
Well,
With that senator in
I think it was
particular?
more politics than stigma.
yeah,
His objections were purely fiscal in nature.
Yeah.
He does not sit on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. He's a budget guy. He's a fiscal guy, and he has a history of throwing up objections to bills like this. So that's just, he's kind of known for that. That's kind of his shtick. It's his thing that he does. So I don't know that it was necessarily an opposition, and that's kind of what we heard from the staffers, that it wasn't opposition to the topic, it was opposition to spending. And that is a political response to the Omni. You know, if you look at messaging, and this is not, you know, saying one is right or wrong or indifferent, the messaging coming out after the Omni passed were the Democrats were all very happy. They got all these things done. The Republicans were like, oh my gosh, they just spent this amount of money and not in a, you know, not in a good way. So it's the political messaging that they're putting in there. And that's what we got caught in. And, you know, he is known for doing this to, you know, when we were talking to some of our policy folks that we connect with that work as lobbyists and work in that space, and we said Senator Lee, they were all like, oh yeah, that's what he does. So, you know, I think to a degree, stigma played a role in some of our interactions with legislative staff, but that's kind of what our approach has been all along, was really to fight that stigma by focusing on the fact that there are people living with FASD and they do need help and support. Because, you know, there are programs out there, there's funding out there, there's legislation out there to support you know, people with alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder, healthy pregnancies, safe moms, safe babies, things like that. But there really isn't anything out there to support people who are born with FASD. And that's kind of where the approach that we came from on this legislation lied. It would be opposing supporting somebody with a disability. And that is, there's still stigma attached there, but yeah, I think it was less a stigma thing and more of a politics thing, and more of a fiscal conservative, being a fiscal conservative. And we kind of got caught in the middle of that. So, and they tried, but we got caught. But really good question.
Yeah, and
So-
I did ask Senator Klobuchar's why it didn't get in the Omni, and she said it had nothing to do with FASD. It had to do with those balancing of, the different interests, and that there were other language that had what she called four corners agreement, where you had people agreeing to that it didn't get in there because of that balancing. You have to, in the Senate, you've got to have it's a pure, you got to have both sides have a win. Okay, so and that you can't have, lopsided. And so that's where we were. We couldn't be, and we were just, so we fell into that category that if we went in one side, then the other side would. So what our strategy, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is we're not going to be, we don't want to put ourselves in that position again. So I don't think we have to worry about going after Senator Lee, because that was like one senator. I mean, the fluke of that thing happening like that. We don't want that happening again. We want our bill just to, based on what we've done, just go in, get a hearing, get passed, and pass the House and the Senate, and then go to the president. Do it the old-fashioned way. So
Can I ask you a question, Jen?
Of course, Teresa.
Yeah, just I was looking up, just reviewing some of these, some of the work he's been doing, and he introduced this bill recently to that is about not having or again having pornography, children not able to view pornography online. So you probably saw that, and if you've done research on him and what he does support. I mean, he's a person that claims to have the interest of children at heart. I wonder, I sort of feel like we need to approach this in a way in the future where we're making those connections that a lot of these kids with prenatal alcohol exposure that don't have supports, that so many of the advocates and parents, that are involved in this policy drive, they don't have that kind of support. So they're the ones that are more connected, maybe some of these issues, especially, we've seen these kids being trafficked, these kids, and inappropriate behavior and this sort of thing that is driven then more by things like pornography on the internet. So I think, unless we can show that there's a link between all of this, and, you take what the person's interested in and say, hey, you can have that. Still, that's to kind of make that this impacts so many realms of our society that you just can't pick and choose. It's it's out there, and it's if people aren't supported, his whole effort is not going to end up going well either. And I apologize, I have the flu, so I'm a little loopy, but I'm trying to make that point. It just keeps coming back to me that we've got to somehow make a bigger case that this is about, not putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. This is about, really looking at the foundation of this issue and trying to show how it impacts, so many different aspects of life, and why we need to work on it in that respect, finding the people who want to help kids, and then just whatever their goal is, drawing that into why it can't happen unless we get the funding, if that makes sense. Anyway.
Even loopy, Teresa, you always make sense. And so, yes, I appreciate you bringing that up and talking about that. And this is, in kind of deconstructing what happened. One of the things I think that went really well in certain areas, this is why we had the constituent meetings, as opposed to FASD United going out there and making all of these meetings, right? Because I don't speak as the, liberal Washingtonian. I don't speak the language that the constituents in each district speak. And so what we tried to do, and what was really successful in some areas, less so in others, and this is a good reminder for us, and I really appreciate you bringing this up, Teresa, is that going into the next Congress, it is going to be important that when we have these meetings, some of the meetings we'd have them and the parents would tell their stories, and people would be upset, and we'd kind of give like an FASD 101, and the parents would tell their stories, and there wouldn't be that connection made. And we'd try to in many cases, and obviously researching them in advance, and we pull the Bloomberg on them and all that. But in some states did a better job of that than others. And some representatives we were able to meet with, some we weren't. We weren't able to cover all 100 senators and all of the representatives in the entire country. I think we want to, but we weren't able to do that. And so this is just a really good reminder for next year, is that in telling our stories, in relaying the information, we do need to relay that and tie that information back in to what that legislator cares about. What are their core values? What do they want to accomplish in their term? Because selling a positive, selling a win for them is a far easier task, and something that's going to be accomplished that can be accomplished in a way that selling a negative or shaming them or harassing or barraging them won't do. So I think that's a really good and really valid point that you made, Teresa, and something that we need to be cognizant of and mindful of going forward.
Yeah, and I do want to note that this last week, a lot of this was driven by staff. And I think we really also need to, and you can find out information about their staff, because they are extremely powerful in the message they give their bosses. So, I did research the staff person, and you can learn a lot about how to present your information to these staff persons, so it meets their philosophy for public policy. And I think we need to do more of that. And I don't know if that would have made a difference. I think we just ran out, the clock ran out on this one. I think we could have done it if we'd had, another day, but and we're going to talk a little bit because I get where Teresa's coming from, and we're going to be looking at doing some different things with the Respect Act. You want to, maybe this is a good time, unless you see any other.
I think there was one other question about pursuing a executive proclamation or executive order as an option. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that because we've gotten so much momentum with members of Congress and the Senate, that it just makes sense to do it this way. If you have an executive order, it dies with with when the president's gone. And so anything, unless there's some funding, so you really need to build it, build our foundation through authorizations in Congress. And it also, we've learned, this is the way we educate our members of Congress. If we just went and said, oh, we're going to do the easy thing and get President Biden to do an executive order, we haven't done our job in educating members of Congress, and we've done that. We need to do more of that. And we came so close. So, and then you've got I think what would happen is you've got our champions here that have worked really hard. And what, the staff for the president would come to and say, well, why, what's happening in Congress on that? And I think it would hurt us with some of the members of Congress that have become our champions. So there could be people that disagree with that, but that's kind of my take on it.
Gregor, you had a question?
Thank you. Yeah, just because there's a lot in the chat about, okay, how do we get to Mike Lee? How do we bring him around? And that's all fine. But my question is, he was the person who was kind of in the way because of this hotline mechanism, but that's not necessarily how this bill could get passed in the new Congress, right? So like,
Exactly.
it'd be great if he was on our side, but we might not need it because it won't go that way, right?
No.
So we don't need to spend like all of our energy towards Mike Lee.
Right. Exactly.
And that's why I have had probably, I would say easily 50 people email me asking me what's the name of the senator. And you will notice that I did not email a single one of you back. And I usually try and email people back when they email me. And part of that is purposeful because, well, that was purposeful because Lee absolutely needs to hear about FASD, and Lee absolutely needs to get educated on FASD, and Lee's staff absolutely need to get educated on FASD. But after all of his staff have gone home now, he's gone home now, let's think really clearly about our strategy for how we want to win him over, and if it's worth expending that time, effort, and energy based on what barrier he's going to actually play in the 118th. Is he going to be on a committee of jurisdiction where we got to worry about him? Is he going to be, are we going to be hotlining the bill again? What's going to be the lay of the land when you've got a Democratic Senate and a Republican held House? That's so those are some considerations. So it really wasn't that I didn't want to respond to your email about, yes, it's Mike Lee and I'm very, very mad at him. Because at the time I really was. But that's why. And so I would just encourage you to be thinking forward as opposed to backward. It's the neurobehavioral approach with our legislative, with our legislators, right? What can we do to build this better for next time? And Carl Young, yes, we can purchase the red shoe keychains in bulk. Actually, I've got a couple of hundred of them sitting at the FASD United office. So
about Senator Lee, in theory, he was just doing his job.
Mhm.
Can't fault him for that. We just need to do better in educating him. Yeah. So.
And that best comes from his constituents. And that's where there will be renewed outreach to the folks in Utah and letting them have that conversation with their legislator is going to be a far more powerful thing than all of us from around the nation. And again, there's times and places for that too. But let's think this through strategically. What's going to support him in making the decision that we want him to make? And that's going to be his constituents, really.
Who do we know that could move to Utah to help them?
Utah will be getting a lot of support from me. So All right, well, let's go ahead, unless there's any other questions, because I definitely don't want to cut anybody short, but our timing is kind of ticking down.
Dan, this is Marilyn. I'm now in Florida, actually, but I just feel like I bet many of us, and Carl included, I was with my son only a week this over Christmas. I mean, my son suffers and I suffer. And to see what he goes through and his feelings and how he can't let stuff go. And then I have to deal with it. And sometimes it's very difficult. I think we all have those stories. We need to get that across. And we don't talk about it very much. These people, it's really, if that guy cares about kids suffering, I mean, he needs, and adults, we need to focus on that. The best call I've ever had, and it was with somebody that didn't even pay attention the first time I talked to her. I brought out the photos. I brought out all the details about my daughter, losing my daughter, about my son, his episodes with the police and what he goes through. And I think that's where we have to go, because this is, I won't compare it to other things they're spending money on when they think people are suffering. But our kids are suffering, and so are we. And we really I would like to see that pushed more and more. Thanks.
I definitely appreciate the input, Marilyn. And, as parent to 3 with FASD myself, I hear you.
And my son has services, but I mean, still, and that's great. And that's why he's not reoffending, but still, I talk about before and after him getting services, because he's a perfect example of what getting services led to, and in Colorado. But I just think if they really know the real details about what the families go through and the people, you're giving these kids have brain damage, and more are being born with brain damage. And let's make sure we don't leave that out. Thanks.
Okay. One of the things that we're going to talk about in a minute is maybe taking some of the provisions in the bill that goes to different committees, such as judiciary, because there is a section in there, and it would have to go to a different committee. Senator Lee is on judiciary. So if we have a bill that takes that provision, and well, maybe we can really get the message that you're all talking about to Senator Lee and that committee. But we need to, I'm getting ahead of ourselves, I think. But
and that's okay. That's I think it's okay to get ahead of ourselves in this situation. I think too, one of the things that the Respect Act did that hadn't really happened before is that it was pushing the fact that it was support for people living with FASD. This was not a prevention bill, although there are prevention parts to it. This was not a research bill, although there were research parts to it. This bill really was about supporting people and families living with FASD. And I think that message really did resonate in the calls where we were able to put that forward. And I think there were a number of them where we were able to do that. I mean, that's why it was so important that constituents telling their stories were on those calls. And I think that's something that we need to continue moving forward, because that is the messaging that is resonating with the lawmakers. And I don't want to go tooting horns or anything like that, but I do think we would be remiss if we didn't reflect back on the things that we did well this last Congress. So, just quickly, we had 74 co-sponsors in the House and 10 in the Senate. In any previous legislation introduced in previous Congresses or legislative sessions, the most they had were 9. 84 versus 9. Let that sink in. We have engaged 84 of our members of Congress as champions for this cause. That didn't happen. We didn't have them before. They weren't there before. I think that's an important statistic. We had almost 500 meetings. So we educated We had 500, almost 500 educational sessions with our members of Congress in the last 2 years. I think that's an important statistic to remember. And we had over 1,300 advocates participating. So we showed not only do we have volume behind our cause, but we are also able to accomplish volume. We showed ourselves as a viable political action group. I think we formed relationships around the country. There are people here that I would consider extremely good, close personal friends that I didn't know before this. And I think there have been connections made between organizations and groups and people and causes because people have gotten together through advocacy. And I think that's an important thing to look at. Through the advocacy push in the 117th, we did get the 5 million put through for developing clinical guidelines in the military healthcare system. Again, that seems kind of out there, like, what is that? But the military healthcare system is the largest insurance company in our country. If they can develop clinical guidelines that work for them, those can then be transferred over to the other insurance companies, medical billing codes, things like that. So I think that's a big, good first step. That's how autism did it. There was a $500,000 increase to the CDC for FASD work. Again, that's more prevention and surveillance because that is their mandate, but that's more FASD dollars. And the CDC is kind of starting to turn to recognizing people with FASD and sharing their lived experience is a preventative mechanism. So I think we're starting to turn that narrative there too. Some of you know the Boston Medical and Proof Alliance collaboration through HRSA. That was funding that we had got through appropriations previously, and we were able to maintain those appropriations. So that project can be ongoing. And that's looking at increasing diagnostic capacity. Again, it's a small pilot project, but it's something that's moving towards the cause. And then to get Senate help leadership agreeing on language for the bill, I think that's also a really good, that's a big win. Because if we think about back when we first met with Senator Burr's staff, and Senator Burr's staff, just keep in mind that when the legislative session ends and legislators leave and new ones come in, those staff don't necessarily leave. They all play musical chairs, but who knows? Charlotte from Senator Burr's office may be working for somebody else this next year, right? And we've won her over. And I think that's an important piece. Another important thing that came out of this is Senator Murkowski did get $500,000 for the Alaska Center for FASD appropriated. So there were some incremental gains that we got through this, and not where we want to be by any stretch of the imagination. You know, I'm not saying, woohoo, great job, we all did it, hooray, work done. I am saying that we need to look along the way and smell the flowers along the way, right? Not just the road apples. We did get some things accomplished this Congress. So looking at our sponsors, and I'm just going to blitz through these because we're kind of running out of time here. You know, we talked about, we got 10 Senate sponsors, 74 in the House, but look at that list, right? Like, just take a minute and look at that list. That's impressive. And you all did that. We, as an FASD community, did that. And I think that's pretty cool. So, and Barbara, sorry, you had your hand up. Before I go further, did you want to ask a question?
No, I had an observation,
Okay.
not a question, but go ahead with what you're doing.
And I do see that Joel also had his hand up. Joel, did you have a question?
Well, it was a suggestion with this impressive effort that's taken place. Can you prepare a document that puts this kind of information in a brief and send it out to all of these senators? including maybe a little bit more robust with Senator Lee, and that we as advocates have a place that we can go and sign our names on the website so that they can see that 1,300 or more. That would be a package that could go out as both a thank you and a document going forward. This is what we've gained, this is what, and the cost savings as part of that. Just
We
a thought.
I love that thought, and that's right along, tracking right along where we were going with this. We do have plans in the work right now to be to have that kind of package document, kind of a let's look at this, a briefing, to be able to send out to our legislators. I hadn't thought about adding signatures to it. I think one of the areas I struggle in with that is because there are times where you will put that out there and ask people to sign up, and because people are busy, you get like 5, right? So if we knew we could get all 1,347 to be precise, signed on, that would be really cool, but that would also take effort. And, you know, do we want people? I don't know. I'm going to have to think on that and see if we can get that done. I really like that idea because I think that would be extremely powerful. It's just how could we translate that into actually happening? And is that, you know, cost benefit, not meaning actual financial costs, but labor wise, from all of you rounding up the people to get their names signed on. But there might be a way to do it. And I appreciate that suggestion. You got me thinking now, Joel. You always get me thinking. All right.
Jen,
So, oh, yes, Barbara.
yeah, if I just could say that one of the supervisors here in Santa Clara County that supported our FASD efforts was at the state level. And he told us, he said, I had a bill that I wanted passed. He said, it took me 6 times. And he was a well-respected man. And he said, the important thing is to continue the same pressure you had when you first started and to be consistent. He said it will happen. Just don't ever throw out there that it won't. So just a word of encouragement. This is a man who had a lot of power and took him 6 times to pass before it did. But just a word of encouragement, not a strategy, except that the consistency that we're not backing down. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. I really like that reminder. And I think it's a very, very wise reminder. So,
Jen,
yeah.
this is Lynn.
Lynn.
All the states are really focusing now on healthcare equity for a variety of reasons, but it's coming into all of our documents. Since I work for the government of Pennsylvania, I know that healthcare equity is in every document that's being developed, how we're going to dedicate ourselves and yada, yada, yada. And we are, and we will. But healthcare equity applies it's equal to, for our individuals with an FASD. They need healthcare equity too, and they're not getting it. So I think we can just throw that back at them and say, well, where's the healthcare equity when it comes to individuals who have an FASD? These are their words and things that they're saying are important to them. So throw it back at them. Where's the equity there?
Yep. I agree. This is
And you can do that
absolutely an
any
equity
state.
issue. Yeah. Absolutely an equity issue. So rolling into, thank you, Lynn. Rolling into what we're going to be doing in January, because we want to hop on this right away. We don't want to be waiting to reintroduce something until the end of the next legislature and have it be down to the wire and, you know, have my Christmas, have Christmas holidays be taking up with stressing out over a bill. I can't do that again. So FASD turns 50 in February. I also turned 50 in February, but FASD turns 50 in February. And so we're looking at, we'd like to be able to reintroduce the FASD Respect Act in February, if at all possible. So what we need to do before we can do that is debrief with the staff. Find out what pushback they had, how we can get around it, what we need to do to get this put through. We need to then find and engage with lead authors for the bill. Murkowski and Klobuchar are probably going to stay the same. But Don Young, our Republican co-sponsor, passed away. We need a strong Republican co-sponsor, preferably who sits on the committee of jurisdiction, to be our lead author on this bill. We like mission critical. And so we're going to need to, based on the relationships that have been built over the last 2 years, identify that person, connect with them, and make sure that they're on board with doing this too. Right. So that's another piece of work that we need to be doing. And then we need to review the bill language with the staff and make sure that the lead authors that we bring on are comfortable with the language that we're proposing, right? Because we can propose the language, but the language that gets put through to the House and Senate ultimately is up to them.
And we've already got language that has been approved by HELP. And so, and one of the suggestions from already, and I just mentioned it from Senator Klobuchar's, is that, and that took out the judiciary piece. And so to take those pieces that would go to different committees out and have them go as a separate piece. And I think then you broaden your base. That allowed, because the HELP committee, they didn't want to deal with anything having to do with justice. So we'll have those discussions. And then the appropriations, that's going to be key, to meet with appropriation staff. And the more you look at this, if we could have come up with what they call a pay for, which is how do you pay for it, or an offset. Where are you going to take it from? Somebody else? Where, and I've spent, I don't know how many hours looking at the appropriations bills, and there are places that we could, but I think we need to be able to have those discussions so they can draw, looking at those different categories in our discussions with appropriation staff, we can say, well, geez, if you would just take maybe this amount from that program, because that really won't be effective unless you have appropriations for FASD. So we have to be a lot more strategic on not just saying, well, this is a great program and it's going to save a lot of money. You've got to figure out how it's going to be paid.
Yeah. So the other things we're going to need to do is update all the materials. Many of you have used the policy website, and state by state, each state has a page with the legislators listed and the state specific sheet. That all needs to be updated with current numbers. All the legislators are going to need to be updated. All of our documents are going to need to be updated. So it's going to be a really busy month. Chris and I are going to have our hands full updating all of that information and getting that together. During January, the best thing that you can do is send a note to your legislators. Again, staying in contact with them, welcoming them to the next legislative session. If they supported the FASD Respect Act in the past, thanking them for that, and letting them know you would love to see something on FASD done this legislative session. Prime the pump, right? And then figure out, once the next legislative session opens, who the staffers are that are handling healthcare policy. Get to know them. Who are they? Where did they go to school? Where did they work before that? What did they do? This is going back to Teresa's point. What did they do? What motivates them? What motivates their boss? Look up all the information you can on your 2 senators and your rep so that you have that ready to go. Melissa has a great approach where she goes to opensecrets.com and looks at who funds them. Where do they get their campaign donations from, right? What's motivating them there. So just getting all the information you can on those folks can be really helpful, and having that ready to go so that if we're able to get legislation introduced in February, And I put this in bold letters for a reason. It will have a different bill number, right? The same bill numbers will not apply. We'll have to memorize new ones, and I'm probably going to screw it up multiple times, just to warn you. So I apologize. We're going over time. If you need to leave, we've taped this. So you can go back and watch the end of it if you have to go. And we don't usually run over, but we had a lot of questions this time, and wanted to make sure we got to those. So any questions on this piece of it? I haven't been looking at the chat. So, okay. So,
Yeah, and
oh,
I have one question, like, you know, and I see what Susan's response was. So it's not a typical thing where you can look up and see who voted yay, who voted no, because even though like my senators, Durbin and Duckworth, were not co-sponsors on the bill, you know, like I would want to thank them for voting yes, except they didn't really vote yes. And it seems weird to like, thank you for not objecting in the confined time limit. Yeah, like,
right, right. I would thank them if they were a co-sponsor, but I wouldn't necessarily thank them for not objecting to the bill when it was hotlined. That is a really good point, Michelle. Thank you. So we're going to be looking a lot at the House and Senate calendar this next year. And so this kind of tells us when the House and Senate will be in session and when our best chances of approach are. And hopefully before something else crazy happens in the House or Senate, like it did in the 117th. So I see Liz has her hand up and Kathy has her hand up. So we'll go in that order if that's okay.
Yeah. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Liz.
I just am wondering, is there a way that we can understand for our representatives, both House and Senate, if there were any that actually said no to sponsoring versus just didn't get approached? Because it would help us do our notes, you know,
Yeah.
what I'm thinking. So like my congressman is a sponsor, but my senator is not, and I don't know why he's not.
So,
I mean, I'm just giving you an anecdotal example
no,
of my dilemma.
totally valid. And I hear where you're coming from. I know that with all of the meetings we had, I had maybe 2 out of the entire bunch, and I believe they were in Texas. Correct me if I'm wrong, Julia, where they said, no, my boss will not support this because if there's not a cost offset, they won't support this. So I think you can, on the whole, assume that if they didn't co-sponsor, it wasn't because they won't, it was because they won't yet.
Okay.
The case had not been made enough for them to co-sponsor.
Okay, but it doesn't mean there wasn't there doesn't mean that there weren't allies or advocates that met with them, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
All right, thank you, that helps me.
Okay. Kathy, you had a question? And you're muted too.
Yeah, I had a question, but you said something I don't understand. How can we assume they would be supportive if we didn't vote or we didn't meet with them? Because there's a lot of people who were not met with and a lot of people in our state who refused to meet.
Because I'm Pollyanna.
Okay, forget it. That's not an answer for me.
No.
That's why we are friends.
Exactly.
We balance each other. I'll ask my other question.
I think it's because I am so doggedly persistent that I believe that everyone is just not saying yes yet. Right?
Okay, Jen, I like that.
To a yes.
I like that. I don't know that I agree with it, but I like it. My question is about organizations. So once we know the bill number, we should go back to all the organizations in our state and more and ask them to support this either again or for the first time. Well, and that's going to continue to be very important, correct?
Yes, absolutely. But here's where it's going to get a little bit easier for you. All of those organizations signed up using an online form. I have their email address. I have their contact information. I will be emailing them in the new year saying, thank you, the bill did not pass. However, we are reintroducing in the next legislative session. Stay tuned, please. And we will be reaching out to you when the new bill numbers are introduced and the new bill language is introduced to ask you to again endorse this cause.
And that's the royal we, as in
That is in
Queen Jen is going
that
to
would be,
recontact them.
His Royal Majesty King Chris and Queen Jen of Administratia. Yes.
Thank
we
you.
will be contacting them, so you can focus on new ones,
Mhm.
and we will focus on the ones that have already supported.
Wonderful. Thank you so
And we're
much.
speaking specifically to organizations that have endorsed the FASD Respect Act. So, all right. So looking at Senate leadership, that's going to change a little bit. Patty Murray from Washington State previously chaired the Help Committee. She's left. She's now going to Appropriations, which is not a bad thing in the least. Susan Collins, who's been a big champion of FASD from Maine. She is also, she's likely ranking in Appropriations. It looks like Bernie Sanders from Vermont is going to be heading the Senate Help Committee, which is great, except for we don't have a huge constituent base in Vermont. So if you know people in Vermont, we're going to want to be really linking and liaising with them, because that's going to be key to getting the bill put through. Also, Louisiana. I know David Deere connected me with some folks in Louisiana, but Louisiana is going to be key with Cassidy. Schatz and Senator Schatz and Murkowski are on Indian Affairs, again, tangentially related to our cause, but also they are big supporters. So that's good to know. And then looking at judiciary, if we want to do anything with the justice system, that's Dick Durbin and Lindsey Graham. Chuck Grassley was previously leading judiciary, and he is term limited. So he's moving off. So those are just ones to kind of keep an eye on. In the House leadership, Kay Granger from Texas and Rosa DeLorio from Connecticut. So Annette, I'm looking at you. Lynn and Julia, I'm looking at you. North Carolina has education and labor. So if we want to do anything with education and labor, we need to be looking at Virginia Fox and then Bobby Scott from Virginia. Energy and commerce, the health subcommittee. So any health policy in the House goes through the Energy and Commerce Committee. We don't know who's going to be chairing the health subcommittee yet, but Kathy McMorris Rogers from Washington and Frank Pallone, they just kind of flip-flopped for this legislative session. And then judiciary, we've got Nadler from New York and Jordan from Ohio. So those are just some names that if you're in those districts, those are ones you're really going to want to get to know and get to know quickly. So I'm going to end as we always end with, together we can do this. We got some great things done in the last legislative session. We didn't get everything done we wanted to, but we can do this. I have never seen a more determined group of people who match my energy in terms of getting things done. I'm usually having, keep up, let's go. And I don't do that with this group. This group is pushing me, come on, Jen, let's go. And I really appreciate that. You have great ideas and great thoughts and plans. And I'm just grateful to be a part of this community, because I, as a parent who spent Christmas Eve laying on their kid's bedroom floor because things were going sideways, very, very sideways. I love having the hope that you all give me. And I know Kathy, I think it was, posted something on our FASD Respect Act Champions Facebook page about hope. And that is absolutely what I have for these next, this next legislative session. I have hope, I have faith, and I have a heck of a lot of determination to get things done. So I'll stay on if anybody has any questions. We did record this, so I will, Chris and I will get that posted up on the website here shortly. So anybody who missed it, as well as the slides, will get those posted up so you can share what you'd like to share. And I want to thank you for taking time out of this last week of December to spend time with us and to come together as a community and forge a path forward. Thank you.